The world watches as Washington bails out Wall Street. But for millions of U.S. citizens, the crisis began long before the markets melted down. We look back at the economic crisis we've been covering all year. Communities displaced, people fighting for jobs and homes.
From the U.S. Treasury in Washington, D.C., I'm Ubby Lewis, and this is Inside USA. Over the past few weeks, the world has watched as some of the best-known brand names in U.S. capitalism have either crumbled or been bailed out by taxpayers. Watching the spectacle unfold on TV, you could be forgiven for thinking that the whole thing is about men in suits, whether on Wall Street or here in Washington. Well, it's not. The meltdown didn't begin on Wall Street, and it didn't begin just a few weeks ago. It's been building for years as U.S. workers have faced stagnant wages and rising costs, whether for food, fuel, housing, or health care. Over the past year here on Inside USA, we've been following those stories. In our very first show, we traveled to New Orleans, just as the city government there began demolishing thousands of units of public housing. The housing crisis in New Orleans has little to do with mortgage-backed financial instruments and everything to do with political decisions and how they play out in people's lives.
The whole world smiles with you. Thank you, Chad. Where you from?
California.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, brother.
When you're laughing, welcome.
The tourists are back in New Orleans' French Quarter, but look beyond the postcard and you can see why so many New Orleanians say the disaster of Katrina never ended.
It brings on the rain.
Tens of thousands of people are still dispersed around the country. Poor neighborhoods have seen little reconstruction, while rents in the city have doubled since the storm. And so, homelessness has also doubled. Just a few blocks and a world away from the French Quarter, a tent city has sprung up under Interstate 10. Chase is one of the people living there.
You know, 'cause you work and you still can't pay the rent. You can work 2 jobs and still can't pay your rent. Just the rent, you know. You're still gonna be under the bridge.
The city needs to be rebuilt.
As far as where my race is from, like the night water and stuff like that, they're not trying to rebuild that. You know, they're really trying to push us out of here.
We went down to the lower 9th Ward, the working-class African-American neighborhood that was devastated when the levees broke and the city flooded. Here, 2.5 years later, there are whole blocks of houses that are just gone, returned to open fields. Before Katrina, there were 5,000 low-income families in public housing. This month, the city began destroying more than 4,000 of those units. The idea is to replace them with mixed-income developments. But there is passionate debate in the city about whether those plans will provide enough affordable housing for the previous residents to return to.
Let them in! This is wrong!
In December, hundreds of protesters were barred from a city council vote on the demolitions. And police pepper sprayed and tasered people in the crowd. From the outside, it seems a little counterintuitive when you have a housing shortage in the city to demolish thousands of units of housing. So what is the case for demolishing all this housing?
The case for demolishing it, would you want to live in a house that had been had water in it and had not been attended to for 2.5 years? A house that probably had lead-based paint problems before Katrina and now had mold problems?
They want them to sit and, you know, just deteriorate so they could flash this in newspapers and across the news and say they're unlivable. This is their purpose of leaving them abandoned for so long. You can see all you have to do is come in with the proper equipment and, you know, clean them up and help revitalize them, and it's the strongest thing going in New Orleans.
For me to beat the try down here, I gotta come
As the battle for public housing in New Orleans pits African-American residents groups against a newly elected majority white city council, the ever-present dynamic of race in America is at play, and it runs much deeper than just the housing debate.
African people were the capital that built capitalism in this country. So that's why we say that race is class, because we as a nation have been racialized, and you know, it has stolen land and stolen people. That is the foundation of this country. And so I think we continue to see that pattern, you know, decade after decade, century after century.
Race is not an issue in America. Shouldn't be. I don't think it is.
Really?
Really, I really don't.
You don't think it's an issue for you? You don't think it's an issue for anybody?
I don't think it should be an issue for anybody. And I don't think it's going to be as big an issue as everyone thinks it's going to be in this presidential race. I have that much hope for America.
Hope. Barack Obama may be making mileage with it as a political message, but here in New Orleans, it's a commodity in short supply. But there is something going on in New Orleans, an experiment of national significance. Migrant workers are rebuilding wealthy neighborhoods, while African American workers are shut out. Public housing is being demolished and gentrified. Public education has already been replaced by privately operated charter schools.
It brings all the rain, keep on smiling.
The new New Orleans may be a glimpse of America's future, a future in which only a shrinking elite has access to those services most Americans used to take for granted.
For 9 decades, the neighborhood of Harlem in New York City has been at the center of African American culture. Today, it's the final frontier for Manhattan's unstoppable real estate boom. Despite recession and economic meltdown across the country, residents of Harlem are still battling gentrification. As rents skyrocket, the community's original inhabitants are being displaced. At the complex intersection of race and class in the USA, we took a look at the battle for the soul of Harlem. New York City is famous for being one of the most expensive places in the world to live. Recession or not, up it goes. This year, the average price of an apartment hit a record $1.7 million. As they say in New York, they're not making any more island. And so gentrification is systematically spreading through working class communities. Harlem's turn was bound to come. Harlem has always been many things at once. Solid working-class neighborhood of African Americans and new immigrants, star-studded cultural capital with world-famous nightclubs, political hotbed in the 1960s, in recent times a place where mainstream politicians must make pilgrimage. But Harlem is changing, as luxury apartments and condos spring up everywhere. Grand old brownstones are getting multi-million-dollar facelifts. The smell of money is in the air. All of this development is challenging Harlem's historic identity and sense of community. For many Harlemites, it feels like an invasion.
The white people taking over. Simple as that. You want me to be honest? The white people trying to push the black people out. It is what it is.
On a holiday Monday in Marcus Garvey Park, we meet George Fleming. He's a lifelong Harlem resident who works as an operating room assistant at a nearby hospital.
You want to know what gentrification in this community is? This is gentrification in progress. High-income housing. The average working African-American, Hispanic, Asian, if you're working 3 jobs, yeah, you can get up in here. But if you're a working everyday guy straight 9 to 5, you better find another job, because everybody in Harlem is working their ass off to keep the little bit of space they have now.
At issue is a massive rezoning of 125th Street.
Microphones work?
Billionaire Mayor Michael Bloomberg wants to transform Harlem's main thoroughfare into a regional business hub with 30-story office towers and some 4,000 new condos and apartments.
Everything is skyrocketing here.
Sekulu Shange runs the legendary Record Shack, which has been on 125th Street for 60 years. He sees the rezoning as an existential threat.
We are being moved from serious rent into unaffordable levels. Now, I haven't heard anything how in the world are we going to be able to afford the type of rents which are being asked here. That is another way of evicting people. That is another way of colonialism being manifested in a different way.
Originally, the city claimed that under the rezoning, almost half of the new housing would be moderately priced. When it turned out that only 5% would be affordable housing, anger spilled over at City Hall.
Clear the balcony, Sergeant at Arms.
But in the end, the politicians passed the plan by an overwhelming margin. All 3 city councilors from Harlem voted for it. All 3 also declined to grant us an interview. Even the business community is muted in its praise.
I was for it with conditions.
And I'm sad to say that even though my councilwoman worked behind all to get some changes in the zoning, we didn't get what we thought we needed.
At the end of the day, is it a win-win? Yes, it is. Did the developers win more than they should? Yes, they did. But the community won something in this battle too, and heretofore this community hasn't won anything in these battles.
On the surface, this may look like just another local real estate battle, but this is New York. In a world center for finance capital, there are always larger forces at play.
The fact that this is being done with the full support and the complicity of the elected officials of Harlem speaks volumes to the importance of this campaign, the real estate industry that fills the campaign coffers of these elected officials.
Back in Marcus Garvey Park, celebration seems like a form of resistance. Just staying put in the community, in the face of gentrification, in the midst of recession, is a kind of victory. Especially when the powerful forces transforming Harlem just keep coming, in boom and bust.
We are a third world colony in a first world country. That's what gentrification is. It isn't simply a matter of, oh, some white people are moving to Harlem. We're talking about the globalization of gentrification in Harlem and what that means for the destruction of the historic community of Harlem.
From all the years people have been talking about, we need affordable housing. We need more support for better living conditions here. Those better living conditions are coming, and we're being pushed out. That is the truth about the whole system, how it works. The writing is already on the wall. We can raise our voice as hard as we can, but if we don't have the support in our city council, and we don't have the support of our congressmen, we're just blowing in the wind. And we already know we're blowing in the wind.
Coming up on Inside USA, from one of America's great cities to a tiny island community. Two different fights for survival in the midst of economic crisis.